It was 3 in the morning when I woke up with a dry throat. My chest had that familiar, unpleasant tightness, a sure sign that in the morning, Sarah would be shaking her head and checking my blood pressure with that look I hated, the look of a paramedic who was used to lost causes. I pushed myself up slowly, my joints groaning in protest. My body, this worn-out, 78-year-old frame, let me down a little more each day. It's why I ended up here 8 months ago, in my daughter's house, living in the small room that used to be Mark's home office. The faint smell of stale coffee and old books was still stuck in the walls, and you could catch a hint of it on warm nights, even after they'd repainted. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the kitchen clock. I felt around for my slippers, a gift from my grandkids last Christmas. They were cheap, probably from a discount store, and the soles were already starting to peel away. "They're just slippers, Grandpa. What did you expect?" My 15-year-old grandson, Jake, had said when I'd turned the gift over in my hands. Sarah had shot me a look that said, "Don't you dare say a word to upset him." A child. I grunted, shuffling toward the door. Jake was already taller than me and had started sneaking his dad's vape pen, thinking no one noticed. And 12-year-old Mia spent hours in front of the mirror, playing with Sarah's makeup. They both looked at me like I was a piece of furniture, a grandfather too old to be interesting and too much of a hassle to be loved. I opened the bedroom door carefully, trying to avoid the squeak. This house never felt like mine. In my old home, the one now sitting empty across town, every floorboard knew my footsteps. Here, I was a guest, no matter what Sarah said. "Dad, you can't live by yourself anymore," she'd insisted after my last hospital stay. There was worry in her voice, but her eyes were tired. "You have a serious heart condition, and I'm a paramedic. I can take care of you." Take care of me, I thought, with a shudder. Taking care of me meant popping her head into my room 5 times a day to make sure I was still breathing. It meant sorting my pills into a plastic organizer, taking away my last bit of independence. It meant scolding me if I dared to walk to the corner market by myself. Once in the kitchen, I poured a glass of water. My hands were shaking, and some of it sloshed onto the counter. I quickly wiped it up with the sleeve of my pajamas. Sarah couldn't stand a mess. She got that from Helen, my late wife. But where Helen's tidiness was gentle, Sarah's was a rigid rule. Helen. I felt that familiar ache in my chest just thinking about her. It had been 4 years, but I still woke up sometimes reaching for her side of the bed. We'd had 47 years together. Then cancer came and took her in less than a year, and my world faded to grey. After finishing my water, I was about to head back to my room when I heard quiet voices coming from the living room. A sliver of light escaped from the half-open door. I stopped. I wasn't the only one who had trouble sleeping. Mark liked to have a drink to unwind, especially on a Friday. But this was a Wednesday night, and I could clearly hear both his voice and Sarah's. "We can't keep this up much longer," Mark was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "The final notice from the credit card company came today. A couple more missed payments, and they'll send it to collections." "I know," Sarah's voice was weary. "But what do you want me to do? I can't work more shifts than I already am. I'm pulling doubles as it is." "Your father's house is the answer," Mark said, and the tone in his voice made me go still. "It's just sitting there, empty, while we're drowning in debt. If we sold it..." "Mark, we've been over this. Dad would never agree. That house is all he has left of Mom." "He'd agree if he wasn't so damn stubborn." "For God's sake, Sarah, we do everything for him. He lives in our house, eats our food, takes up a room. And what do we get for it? A tiny pension that barely covers his prescriptions." I stood frozen by the kitchen doorway. His words were like acid. So that's what I was to them, a burden, Another mouth to feed. I'd offered to pay them rent, but Sarah had refused, saying she was insulted I'd even suggest it. Now I knew why. My small pension was already swallowed by their expenses. So what's your solution? A hard edge entered Sarah's voice. Kick him out on the street? There was a pause. A cold dread washed over me. No, babe, I'm saying. We help things along. I almost dropped my glass. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. What are you talking about? Sarah whispered. But there was no shock in her voice, just exhaustion. Listen. Mark's voice dropped lower, and I crept a step closer to hear. Your dad is sick. His heart is a ticking time bomb. One bad episode and it's over. A natural death. No one would question it. You said yourself he's living on borrowed time. Mark, are you insane? That's my father. The father who barely gave you the time of day when your mother was alive. Who missed your high school graduation for a business trip? Who argued with my entire family at our wedding? My heart clenched. All those old resentments, all my past mistakes. I hadn't been a perfect father. I knew that. I worked too much, was too strict. I had tried to make things right after Helen died, but it was too little, too late. It doesn't matter, Sarah said, but her voice was trembling. What you're suggesting is murder. It's not murder if no one knows, Mark insisted. You're a paramedic. You have access to things, something that could trigger a heart attack but wouldn't leave a trace. He'd just pass away in his sleep, peacefully. You'd be there. You'd know what to do. Call 911 when it's already too late. No one would ever suspect a paramedic with 15 years of experience. Silence. A long, terrifying silence. I could feel my own heart hammering against my ribs, threatening to betray me with an attack right then and there. I can't, Mark. It's wrong. And losing our house is right. The kids having to change schools. Is that right? Sarah, your dad doesn't have much time left anyway. We'd just be speeding up the inevitable and solving our problems at the same time. More silence. I could hardly breathe. If he had just agreed to sell the house, Sarah said softly, he won't. You know that. He's holding on to that place like your mother is still there. That house is sitting empty, collecting dust when it could save us. Jake and Mia. They won't understand if we lose everything. They won't have to understand if we do this right. Your father's house is worth enough to pay off all our debts and give us a fresh start. No more late notices, no more hiding from bill collectors. I heard a small sob. Was my daughter crying, or was it a sound of surrender? How? How would we do it? Horror seized me. She was agreeing. My own daughter was discussing how to kill me. There are drugs that can mimic a heart attack. You know the ones. We slip it into his nightly pills, wait for him to fall asleep. And he just wouldn't wake up, Sarah finished for him. Her voice was flat, detached. I could get potassium chloride. A high enough dose would cause cardiac arrest. His doctor wouldn't be surprised, given his history. The glass finally slipped from my hand, clattering onto the linoleum floor. The voices in the living room stopped. What was that? I heard Mark's tense whisper. Dad must have woken up, Sarah replied. I'll go check. I had only a few seconds. Panic surged through me. If they found out I'd heard them, that I knew everything, they wouldn't wait. They'd do it tonight. I scrambled back to my room, forgetting the pain in my joints, the pressure in my chest. My heart was pounding, and dark spots danced in my vision. The irony was not lost on me. Dying of a heart attack right now would save them the trouble. Dad! Sarah's voice called from the hallway. Are you awake? I fumbled with the lock on my door and leaned my back against it, trying to catch my breath. What could I do? Call the police. Hello, officer. My daughter and son-in-law are planning to kill me. Without any proof, I'd sound like a confused old man losing his mind. Dad? Sarah knocked softly. Are you okay? Her concern, her fake, sickening concern. I clenched my fists. Yeah, I managed to say, trying to make my voice sound sleepy. Just getting some water. I'm heading back to bed. Are you sure you're all right? Did you take your evening pills? Yes, I'm fine, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Good night, Sarah. Good night, Dad. I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall. Only then did I let myself slide down to the floor. I was trembling all over. My own daughter, my flesh and blood. She and Mark wanted to kill me for money, for the house I'd lived in for 40 years, where every corner held a memory of Helen. My mind raced. In the morning, they would see it in my eyes, in the way I acted. I was never good at hiding my feelings. Helen always told me that, and Sarah knew me too well. Once they realized I knew, they'd have no choice. They would have to act fast, maybe even tonight. I looked around the small room. I had to run, right now. The only sound was the ticking of my alarm clock, counting down the seconds of my life. With frantic energy, I pulled an old duffel bag from the back of the closet. I threw in a change of clothes, a sweater and some socks. My hand shook as I grabbed my wallet and ID from the nightstand. At the bottom of the drawer, I found an envelope with a few $100s in cash. I always kept some money aside for a rainy day. I never imagined the storm would be like this. I changed into a pair of jeans and a shirt and pulled on an old jacket. It was March and cold outside, but freezing to death on a park bench was better than dying here at the hands of my own child. After pulling on my boots, I carefully slid open the window. My room was on the ground floor with nothing but a few overgrown bushes below. I listened one last time. The house was silent. I swung a leg over the windowsill. My old joint screamed in protest, but adrenaline was a powerful painkiller. The cold night air hit my face as I landed softly on the grass. My heart was still racing, threatening to give out at any moment. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let them win. Slowly, trying not to make a sound, I crept across the lawn toward the side gate. It groaned as I pushed it open. I froze, waiting for a light to flick on, for someone to call my name. But nothing happened. The street was empty. The streetlights cast lonely yellow circles on the pavement. Where could I go? I didn't know anyone in this neighborhood. All my old friends lived near my house, on the other side of the city. I started walking, just to put distance between me and that house. Each step was an effort. The cold air burned my lungs, but fear and the bitter sting of betrayal pushed me forward. Help things along. The words echoed in my head. I was just an old man to them now, an obstacle. I was walking down a dark suburban street in the middle of the night, a gray-haired man with a duffel bag, running for his life from his own daughter. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew what I was running from my own family, who had become strangers. From blood that had been poisoned by greed. Their plan would fall apart in the morning when they found me gone. They couldn't kill me if they couldn't find me, and I would make sure they never found me again, even if it meant starting over at 78. For a fleeting moment, I hoped this was all a terrible nightmare, that I'd wake up in my bed and Sarah would bring me my oatmeal and pills, just like every other morning. But the cold wind on my face told me this was real. A horrible, cruel reality where my own daughter wanted me dead. With every step, the cold seeped deeper under my old jacket. The March night was unforgiving to an old man on the run. I walked on, clutching my worn duffel bag, each breath a painful effort in my chest. It's strange how fast your life can turn upside down. A few hours ago, I was sleeping in a warm bed. Now I was a fugitive wandering empty streets, fleeing my own family. My heart was working overtime, beating far too fast for a man with my condition. I stopped under a streetlight, leaning against the pole to catch my breath. With trembling fingers, I unzipped my bag and pulled out the small plastic vial of pills. Sarah had always insisted I keep them with me. Just in case, Dad. Now, that precaution was saving my life. I slipped a nitroglycerin tablet under my tongue, the cold metal of the pole seeping through my jacket. My legs, with their aching joints and swollen ankles, protested every step. The shortness of breath was getting worse. I wasn't built for this kind of marathon. The suburban streets were asleep. The few cars that passed were driven by people lost in their own worlds, oblivious to the old man standing alone under a streetlight. But who pays attention to other people's problems? Old people become invisible after a certain age, especially to the young, who look right through you as if you're already a ghost. When my heart calmed a little, I pushed myself to keep going. I had to get to the other side of town, to my old neighborhood where George Miller, my former neighbor, lived. He was the only person I could think to turn to at this hour. The buses wouldn't be running for hours. A taxi? I had the cash, but calling for a cab would leave a digital trail. If Sarah and Mark reported me missing, it would be easy for them to check the taxi companies. No, I had to walk, at least for a while. Maybe I could catch a ride later, or wait for the first morning bus. I shuffled through the sleeping city, each block feeling longer than the last. My feet were numb with cold, and my fingers could barely grip the handle of my bag. My breath plumed in the frosty air. What would Helen say if she could see me now? She'd probably scold me for being so reckless. Then she'd take my hand and walk beside me, just like she always did. At an intersection, I paused, trying to get my bearings. I used to know this city like the back of my hand, but so much had changed. New subdivisions had sprung up, and old landmarks had been replaced by modern shopping centers. The city grew and evolved, while I just got older, more obsolete. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness washed over me. I staggered, grabbing onto the nearest thing for support, a mailbox. Black spots swam in my vision. Not now, I pleaded silently. Don't have a heart attack in the middle of the street. Don't let them win this easily, Arthur. I took a few deep, slow breaths, just like my cardiologist had taught me, focusing on calming my pulse. Gradually, the dizziness passed, but I knew I couldn't keep this up for much longer. I needed to find shelter, warmth, and a place to rest. Across the street, the lights of a 24-hour gas station glowed. It was a chance. I crossed the empty road, the pain in my knees a dull, constant throb, and pushed open the glass door. A blast of warm air hit my face. Behind the counter, a young man with earbuds was half asleep, scrolling on his phone. He glanced up as the door chimed, then immediately looked back down, uninterested in his elderly customer. I walked between the aisles, pretending to look at the snacks. Really, I just needed a moment to warm up and think. I grabbed a bottle of water and went to the counter. "Cold out there tonight," I said, holding out a few dollars. The young man just shrugged, not taking his earbuds out. "Yep." "Can you tell me when the first buses start running?" He reluctantly pulled one earbud out. 5:30, I think. Route 12. The stop's just around the corner." I nodded gratefully. 5:30. I still had a couple of hours to wait, but it was better than walking the whole way. "Thanks. Would it be okay if I sat here for a bit? Just to warm up?" The kid gave me a long look. I probably looked like a wrecking old man with a wind-burned face and a shabby bag. "Only if you buy something else," he said flatly. "Boss doesn't like people loitering." I didn't bother explaining that I wasn't a vagrant. I just bought a pack of crackers and a cup of watery coffee from the machine. He gestured toward a small table by the window, and I sank into the hard plastic chair with a sigh of relief. The hot cup warmed my frozen hands. I stared out at the empty street and wondered how my life had come to this. 78 years old, a whole life behind me, and here I was, hiding in a gas station, on the run from my own children who wanted me dead. Time passed agonizingly slowly. I dozed off and on, jolting awake at every sound. Finally, the sky outside began to lighten. The clock on the wall showed it was just after 5. It was time to go. I mumbled a thank you to the cashier, who didn't even seem to notice I was leaving, and stepped back out into the cold. Dawn was painting the sky in pale shades of pink and grey. It felt a little warmer, or maybe my body had just given up fighting the cold. The bus stop was empty. I sat on the cold, metal bench, clutching my bag. It wasn't like anyone was around to steal it, but the habit of being wary was now burned into me. Helen always used to say I was too suspicious. Well, that suspicion might just save my life. The bus arrived right on time. The driver, a tired-looking man in his 50s, gave me an indifferent glance as I paid my fare. To him, I was just another early morning passenger, practically invisible. The bus was nearly empty. A woman in a cleaning uniform was dozing in the back, probably on her way to an early shift at a hotel. I sat by the window, holding my bag on my lap. The bus pulled away from the curb, and I watched the familiar streets roll by. Somewhere back there, in their quiet suburban house, Sarah and Mark had probably discovered I was gone. What would they do? Would they search for me? Call the police? 40 minutes later, I got off at my stop. It was only a few blocks to George's house. My legs felt better after the rest, and I walked with more purpose than I had all night. This neighborhood was painfully familiar. This was where I had lived most of my life, where Helen and I had raised Sarah, where we had made plans for a future that was now just a memory. George's house looked exactly the same, a small single-story home with a tidy lawn and a white fence. He had always been proud of his garden, but now, in early spring, it was just bare earth and empty branches. I hesitated at his gate. It was 6:30 in the morning, far too early for a visit, but I had no other choice. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the gate and walked up to the front door. The doorbell chimed somewhere deep inside the house. I waited, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, a mix of cold and nerves. What would I tell him? How could I explain showing up like this? The truth sounded so insane, who would ever believe it? After a moment, I heard footsteps. The lock turned, and George Miller, my neighbor for over 30 years, stood in the doorway. He had aged since I'd last seen him. His hair was completely white, his face a map of wrinkles, but his eyes were the same, sharp and observant. "Arthur?" The surprise in his voice was real. "What on earth are you doing here at this hour?" "George," my voice trembled. "I'm sorry to show up like this. I need your help." He stared at me for a few seconds, taking in my disheveled appearance. Then he stepped back. "Get inside. You look like you've been through hell." I gratefully stepped over the threshold. The house was warm and smelled of fresh coffee. George was an early riser, just like me. "Come on back to the kitchen," he said, closing the door. "I just made a pot." I followed him down the familiar hallway. George's house hadn't changed much over the years. Same photos on the walls, same worn-out rugs. He'd lived alone since his wife, Margaret, passed away, just as I had after Helen was gone. The only difference was his kids lived in other states and couldn't micromanage his life. In the kitchen, George pointed to a chair and silently poured 2 mugs of coffee. He set one in front of me and sat down across the table. "All right, talk to me," he said, his eyes studying me carefully. "What happened?" I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. Where did I even begin? How could I explain the horror of the last few hours? "Sarah and Mark, they're trying to kill me," I said, the words coming out in a raw whisper. There was no point in trying to soften it. George blinked. His hand, holding his own mug, froze halfway to his lips. What? I overheard them last night. They're planning to slip something into my pills. Something to make it look like I had a heart attack. They want to sell my house to pay off their debts. George set his mug down slowly. His face was filled with concern, but also doubt. Arthur, are you sure you heard that right? Maybe you were dreaming? No. I shook my head firmly. I heard them with my own ears. Mark said they needed to help things along. And Sarah, my own daughter George. She agreed. She said she could get the drug from her work. George rubbed his chin, a thoughtful look on his face. I could see he was struggling to believe me. And why would he? The story sounded like the paranoid ramblings of a sick old man. Listen, he began gently. I know things have been tough for you since Helen passed, and moving in with Sarah. That's a big adjustment. Sometimes, when we're under a lot of stress, our minds can... Damn it, George, I'm not losing my mind, I snapped, and my heart gave a painful throb in response. I heard them. They were talking about how to do it, how to make it look like a natural death. Sarah is a paramedic. She knows exactly how. George held up his hands in a calming gesture. Okay. Settle down. Just tell me everything from the beginning. I took a deep breath, trying to get my emotions under control. Then I told him. Everything. How I'd woken up, the conversation I'd overheard, their exact words. George listened in silence, not interrupting once. When I finished, he stared into his coffee mug for a long time, as if the answer was floating in the dark liquid. This is a serious accusation, Arthur, he finally said. You know that, right? Without any proof. I know, I rubbed my tired eyes. That's why I didn't go to the police. Who's going to believe an old man accusing his own daughter, a paramedic, of trying to murder him? They'll say I'm senile, that it's a side effect of my medication. George nodded. He understood the situation perfectly. So what's your plan? I shrugged. I didn't have a plan. I was just running. I don't know. I need a place to stay, to think things through. Maybe figure out a way to prove what they're planning. George tapped his fingers on the table. You can stay here for a few days, of course, he said finally. I've got a spare room. But we'll have to figure something out. If what you're saying is true. It's true, George. I looked him straight in the eye. I swear on Helen's memory. He sighed. All right. I believe you. Or at least, I'm trying to. But you're right. We need proof if you're going to do anything about this. What kind of proof? I spread my hands helplessly. A recording of them? A confession? I don't know, George answered honestly. But we'll think of something. For now, you need to get some rest. You look dead on your feet. He was right. The exhaustion was a physical weight pressing down on me. The sleepless night, the stress, the long walk, it was all too much for my old heart. George showed me to the guest room. It was small but clean and welcoming. The bed was made with fresh sheets, and a glass of water sat on the nightstand. Get some sleep, George said, leaving me alone. We'll talk more later. I sat on the edge of the bed, the full weight of what had happened crashing down on me. My daughter wanted me dead. How did it come to this? Where did I go so wrong in raising her? Or was it Mark, twisting her mind? Thoughts swirled in my head, a chaotic mess of anger and grief. But exhaustion won out. I lay down on the bed without even taking off my clothes. My last thought before I drifted off was, will they find me here? And what will happen if they do? I woke to the sound of a television. It was dark in the guest room. The curtains were drawn, but a sliver of light from under the door told me it was daytime. The clock on the nightstand said it was 2 in the afternoon. I had slept for nearly 8 hours. Getting out of bed, I felt an ache in every muscle. The long walk through the night had taken its toll on my old body. I put a hand to my chest. My heart was beating steadily, a good sign. After splashing some water on my face in the small bathroom, I went into the living room. George was sitting in his armchair watching the local news. "You're up," he said, noticing me. "How are you feeling?" "I've been better," I said honestly, sinking onto the sofa. "But I'm alive, and right now, that's what counts." George nodded and pointed a thumb at the TV. "You should see this." A local news program was on, and to my horror, my own photo filled the screen. Underneath it, a banner read, "Missing endangered elderly man." The news anchor was saying, "Police are asking for the public's help in locating 78-year-old Arthur Hampton, who disappeared from his daughter's home late last night. Mr. Hampton suffers from a heart condition and requires daily medication. His family is concerned he may be disoriented due to the onset of age-related dementia." "Dementia?" I gasped. "I don't have dementia." "Quiet," George said, turning up the volume. Sarah appeared on the screen. She looked distraught, her eyes red and puffy. She was a brilliant actress. "Dad, if you're watching this, please just call us or go to the police," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're all so worried about you. You need your medication. You know how important it is." Mark stood beside her, a supportive hand on her shoulder. His face was a mask of concern, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "Mr. Hampton recently suffered a series of small strokes," he added, addressing the reporters. "His doctors warned us there might be periods of confusion and memory loss. We just want him home safe." "Strokes?" I almost choked. "That's a lie. I've never had a stroke in my life." George muted the TV and turned to me, his expression grim. "They're building a narrative, Arthur. If they find you, it will look like you really are suffering from dementia and wandered off in a state of confusion." I leaned back against the sofa cushions, stunned. They had thought of everything. If I went to the police now with my story, who would believe me? A man whose own family claimed he was suffering from dementia after a series of strokes. "They're turning me into a crazy old man," I whispered, "so that no one will take my word over theirs." George nodded grimly. "And they're doing it well. Sarah's a paramedic. Her word carries weight. If she says you have dementia, people will believe her, not me." I finished his thought. "George, what am I going to do?" He rubbed his chin, deep in thought. "We need proof, Arthur. Hard, undeniable proof of what they're planning. Without it, you really will just look like a paranoid old man." "But how? How do I prove something I just happened to overhear?" Before George could answer, the doorbell rang. We both jumped. A jolt of pure fear shot through me. "Have they found me already?" "Stay put," George whispered, getting to his feet. "I'll see who it is." He walked out to the hallway, and I sat frozen on the sofa, straining to hear. My heart was pounding again. If it's the police? If it's Sarah and Mark? I heard the front door open, followed by an unfamiliar man's voice. George answered quietly. I couldn't make out the words. A moment later, the door closed, and George returned to the living room, holding a flyer. "Police," he said, handing it to me. "They're canvassing the neighborhood, asking if anyone's seen you." I took the flyer. My own face stared back at me. It was the same photo from the news. At the bottom, it listed a police phone number and the words, "Suffers from a heart condition and dementia. May be confused and in need of medical assistance." "What did you tell them?" I asked, a cold feeling spreading through my stomach. "That I hadn't seen you, of course," George said, sitting down beside me. "But they're going door to door. They might come back, maybe even with a warrant if Sarah pushes it and mentions we were old neighbors." I crumpled the flyer in my hand, feeling a wave of desperation. I was trapped. If I went outside, someone might recognize me. If I stayed here, I was putting my friend at risk. George put a hand on my shoulder. We'll figure something out, Arthur, but without proof. I'm afraid no one will believe your story. Not against the word of a paramedic and her husband. Not when they've already painted you as an old man who's lost his mind. I nodded, the bitter truth of his words sinking in. Without proof, I was just a crazy old man who had run away from home. And no one would ever believe that my own daughter was plotting my murder. After 3 days of hiding at George's, I knew I couldn't stay there like a scared rabbit forever. The police search continued. My face was still on the evening news, and the story of the confused old man with dementia was becoming more detailed. Sarah gave another interview, talking about my supposed memory lapses, how I sometimes failed to recognize my own grandchildren, and my recent unfounded suspicions. She sounded so sincere, so genuinely worried, that for a moment, even I started to doubt my own sanity. I have to get back to my house, I told George over breakfast, pushing my oatmeal away. George raised his eyebrows. Are you crazy? They're probably watching the place. It's the first place they'd expect you to go. I don't think so, I shook my head. Sarah thinks I'm too weak and confused to make it across town on my own. She probably thinks I've either been taken in by some good Samaritan, or... I didn't finish the sentence, but we both knew the alternative. Or I was already dead in some alley. It's still too risky, George insisted. What would you even be looking for? My papers, I answered. The deed to the house, my bank information. Some personal things. If I'm going to fight them, I need to secure my assets. George sighed, seeing my point. Over the past few days, he had come to fully believe my story, especially after hearing the elaborate lies they were spinning on the news. Maybe we should talk to a lawyer, George suggested. Tell him your story, show him the deed. A lawyer won't do anything without proof, I said, shaking my head. We need something solid first, a recording of them, some kind of evidence. George rubbed his chin. Are there any security cameras at your house? Or maybe a neighbor's? I shook my head. No, I never installed any. And the neighbors. I doubt their cameras are pointed at my house. We sat in silence for a moment, weighing the options. All right, George said finally. Let's say you go, but you're not going alone. I'll drive you. I'll wait down the street. If anything looks wrong, I'm coming in. I nodded, grateful. George was a true friend. At 73, he was still fit and strong, a stark contrast to my own frail condition. We decided to go that evening, after dark. It would be less likely that anyone would recognize me. George gave me a baseball cap and an old jacket to wear a flimsy disguise, but better than nothing. The day dragged on. I was a bundle of nerves, constantly checking my pulse, terrified my heart would give out at the worst possible moment. Before we left, I took my medication and put a few extra pills in my pocket, just in case. At 7 o'clock, we were in George's old sedan. I pulled the cap down low and slumped in the passenger seat. My house was a 20-minute drive away, in a quiet neighborhood of modest single-story homes where Helen and I had spent most of our lives. Remember, George said as he turned onto my street, you get in, grab what you need, and get straight out. No sentimental wandering. If you see a light on or Mark's car, you turn around and leave immediately. I'll be waiting right around the corner. I nodded, my stomach churning with fear. What if they were watching the house? What if the police were patrolling the area? But it was too late to turn back. George stopped the car a block from my house. I took a deep breath. Good luck, George said, giving my shoulder a squeeze. I'll wait here for 30 minutes. If you're not back by then, I'm coming after you. I got out of the car and was immediately hit by the March chill. My house was at the end of the street, all its windows dark. I walked slowly, trying to look casual, though the street was deserted. As I got closer, I paused, looking at the familiar silhouette. My whole life had happened here. This was where I had been happy with Helen, where Sarah had grown up, and where she had decided to betray me. I still had a key. It was a little secret Sarah didn't know about. She thought she had collected all the spares when she moved me to her house, but I had always kept one hidden in the backyard, tucked under a false bottom in the old birdhouse I had built for Sarah when she was just a girl. I slipped around to the back of the house, fumbled in the dark for the birdhouse, and retrieved the key. My hands trembled as I slid it into the lock on the back door. With a soft click, I was inside. The air was stale and dusty. I moved by memory, keeping the lights off. I made my way through the dark kitchen to my study, where I kept all my important documents in a desk drawer. The moonlight filtering through the window was enough to see by. I opened the drawer and began sifting through the files. Deed to the house, insurance policies, bank statements. It was all there. I was stuffing the papers into the bag I'd brought when I heard a car pull up outside. My heart leapt into my throat. I froze, listening. A car door slammed, then another. Voices. I recognized them instantly. Sarah and Mark. A cold wave of panic washed over me. They're here. I looked around desperately for a place to hide. There was nowhere. I had to get out the back door before they came inside. But it was too late. I heard a key turn in the front door lock. A switch flipped and light flooded the hallway, a bright line appearing under the study door. God, it's covered in dust. Sarah's voice was annoyed. We'll have to get a cleaning service in here before we can show it to anyone. First, we have to clear out all this junk, Mark replied. All this old furniture, the books, who even reads anymore? I shrank behind the desk, holding my breath. They were talking about selling my house as if I were already dead. The realtor said it's a good neighborhood. The house could be worth more than we thought, Sarah continued, especially with a few cosmetic updates. We don't have time for updates, Mark countered. The bank gave us 1 more month. After that, they start foreclosure proceedings. I know, Sarah sounded tired. These damn loans. I never should have agreed to that trip to Hawaii. Hey, you wanted that trip as much as I did, Mark said defensively. And what about the new car? The designer clothes for Mia. We both got us into this mess, and we can get ourselves out. We just have to solve the problem with your father. There was a pause. I could hear their footsteps as they moved through the house, their voices getting closer, then farther away. I stayed huddled in the corner, praying they wouldn't come into the study. Did you see the news? Sarah asked. Still no sign of him. It's like he just vanished. Maybe he did, Mark replied grimly. At his age with his heart, out on the street on a cold night. You know, don't say that, Sarah's voice trembled. He's still my father, Mark. The father you were ready to put in the ground yourself, Mark shot back. Don't play the devoted daughter now, Sarah. We both know you were never that close to him. It's different, Sarah said quietly. A controlled situation. That's one thing. I would have made it quick, painless. It's another thing to imagine him out there, cold and hungry or already gone. Enough, Mark cut her off. We need to focus on the future, on saving our own home. Him being missing is for the best. No need to mess with any drugs now. What if he's found? I could hear the fear in Sarah's voice. What if he told someone what he heard? Who would he tell? Mark scoffed. He has no friends left. And if he did go to the police, who would they believe? A respected paramedic? A loving daughter? Or a confused old man with dementia? He doesn't have dementia, Sarah said softly. The police don't know that. Mark's voice was smug. And the doctors don't either. Medical records can be adjusted. You have access. All right, Sarah sighed. Let's just check the rest of the rooms. We need to make a list of what to throw out and what to sell. Their footsteps approached the study. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. The doorknob turned. Light from the hallway spilled into the room. I pressed myself further into the shadows behind the desk, praying they wouldn't see me. Look at all this paperwork, Sarah said, flipping on the office light. I'll have to go through all of this. Later, Mark said. It's getting late. Let's just finish looking around and go home. I have to be up at 5 a.m. for my route. Okay. Sarah switched off the light and closed the door. I let out a slow, shaky breath. They hadn't noticed the open drawer. They hadn't seen me. Their voices faded as they moved to the other end of the house, discussing what to do with the furniture, what price to list the house for. They talked about it all so casually, as if it wasn't my life they were dismantling. 15 minutes later, I heard the front door slam, followed by the sound of a car driving away. Only then did I dare to stand up, my legs stiff and cramped. I had been lucky, incredibly lucky. But I knew that luck wouldn't last. I had to act fast. I finished gathering my papers, adding a few photos of Helen and her last letter to me to the bag. As I was about to leave, my eyes fell on an old box on a shelf. I opened it. Inside was a small microcassette recorder I had used for work years ago. An antique, but it might still work. I picked it up and checked the batteries. The small red light blinked on when I pressed the record button. It worked. There were even a few blank tapes in the box. An idea sparked in my mind. If I could get them on tape, get a confession, that would be proof. Undeniable proof. I put the recorder and the tapes in my bag. I didn't know how I would use it yet, but just having it gave me a sliver of hope. Before I left, I took one last look around the house. Every room held a memory. The bedroom where Helen and I had slept. The living room where we'd celebrated Sarah's birthdays. The kitchen where we'd made pancakes on Sunday mornings. How had it all come to this? I slipped out the back door, locked it, and returned the key to its hiding place. Then I hurried back to where George was waiting. He was visibly relieved when he saw me. "You're late. I was about to come looking for you." "Sarah and Mark showed up," I said, getting into the car. "I had to hide." George's eyes widened. "And they didn't see you?" "No. They were just looking the place over, planning the sale. They're convinced I've either run off for good or I'm already dead." George shook his head as he started the car. "What kind of people do that to their own family?" "Family," I said with a bitter laugh. "You know what I've realized, George? Family isn't about blood. It's about the people who care for you, who would never betray you." He nodded silently as we drove away. We were both thinking the same thing, how the people closest to you can be the most dangerous, and how the loneliness of old age can make you vulnerable. "What's your next move?" George asked as we neared his house. I pulled the small recorder from my bag. "I found this in my study. It's old, but it works. If I can get a recording of them talking." "That's not a bad idea," George said. "But how are you going to do it?" "I'm going to go back to their house." The plan was risky, almost insane, but it was the only way. I'll pretend I've lost my memory, that I don't remember anything about why I left. They'll believe it. It fits perfectly with their dementia story. "That's too dangerous, Arthur," George protested. "What if they decide to act right away?" "They won't," I shook my head. "Not immediately. They'll be cautious. There's been too much attention on them since I disappeared. They'll wait for things to quiet down. And in that time, I'll get my recording." George shook his head, but he didn't argue. He knew I didn't have any other choice. Without proof, I was just a confused old man. With a confession on tape, I had a chance. We spent the rest of the evening planning. How I would contact Sarah, what I would say, how I would hide the recorder. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only way to protect myself and my home. It was the only way to prove that I wasn't a senile old man, but a victim of my own children's greed. As I fell asleep that night, I thought of Helen. What would she say if she knew what our daughter had become? What would she do? The answer was clear. Helen was a fighter. She would never give up, and neither would I. For her memory, and for myself. To prove that being old doesn't make you powerless. Even with a bad heart, you can find the strength to fight when your life is on the line. The next morning, we started preparing. George helped me test the recorder. We made sure the sound quality was clear enough. Then we figured out the best way to hide it. "Your pockets are no good," George said. "It's the first place they'd check if they got suspicious." An idea came to me. I always wear a vest under my shirt for warmth. You could sew a small pocket on the inside, between the lining and the fabric. The recorder is small enough that it won't be noticeable. George, whose late wife had been an avid sewer, found a needle and thread. Soon, my old vest had a secret pocket. The recorder fit perfectly. Now, the trick is to remember to turn it on and off at the right times, George reminded me, and to switch out the tapes. We decided I would hide the used tapes in an old shoebox filled with photos. Sarah had never shown any interest in it, dismissing it as an old man's sentimental junk. Then came the hardest part. The phone call to Sarah. We rehearsed my story over and over until it sounded convincing. I dialed her number from George's phone. She answered on the first ring. "Hello?" Her voice was tense. "Sarah, it's Dad," I said, making my voice sound weak and tired. "Dad!" she exclaimed, her relief so convincing it almost fooled me. "Oh my God, where are you? We've been worried sick." I don't know how to explain it," I said, pausing just as we had practiced. "I felt sick that night. I went outside for some air, and then I don't remember anything else. I woke up on a bus station bench. Some nice woman helped me, took me to her place." "Dad," Sarah's voice shifted into her professional paramedic tone. "Did you have another episode? A small stroke, maybe? Do you know who you are? Where you live?" "Of course I know who I am," I said, adding a touch of irritation. "I'm not crazy, Sarah. I don't know what happened. I felt like I was in danger, like I had to run." "It's called a paranoid episode, Dad." Her voice was soft and soothing. "It can happen. The doctor warned us about it." She was so good at lying, weaving her fiction so seamlessly into the conversation. "You're probably right," I said humbly. "I want to come home, Sarah. I'm so tired." "Of course, Dad," she said, her voice warm with relief. "Just tell me where you are, and Mark and I will come get you right away." "No," I said firmly. "I'll get there myself. I need to. To prove to myself I can still do things on my own." There was a pause. I could almost hear her weighing the options. "Okay," she said finally. "But please be careful. Call me if you start to feel unwell. Promise?" "I promise," I said, my voice full of fake gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah." After the call, George looked at me, his face etched with worry. "Are you sure you can do this? It's a dangerous game, Arthur." "I don't have a choice," I replied, checking the fit of the recorder in my vest. "Without proof, I'm nothing. I have to get that recording." George sighed but didn't argue. Instead, he handed me a small old flip phone. "Take this. Call me anytime. If I don't hear from you in 3 days, I'm calling the police." I tucked the phone into my pocket. We agreed I would call him whenever I had a chance to be alone, like when I went out to get the mail. That afternoon, George drove me to a bus stop near Sarah's house. We agreed it would look more believable if I arrived on my own. "Be careful, Arthur," George said, shaking my hand. "And remember, if you feel threatened, just leave. The house isn't worth your life." I nodded, though I knew it wasn't about the house anymore. It was about justice. The bus ride was 20 minutes of pure anxiety. What if they suspected something? What if they decided to act sooner than I thought? Before I turned onto their street, I took a deep breath and switched on the recorder. The front door opened as soon as I rang the bell. Sarah stood there, her face a mixture of relief, concern, and something else. Disappointment? "Dad!" She hugged me, her joy so convincing it could have brought a stranger to tears. "Thank God you're back. We were so worried." I hugged her back, my body tense. This woman who was holding me now had been planning my murder just a week ago. "I'm sorry to have worried you," I mumbled as I stepped inside. Mark was in the living room. He stood up, a tight smile on his face. "Welcome back, Arthur. You look exhausted. Rough week?" I nodded, feigning confusion. "I don't remember much of it, to be honest. It's all a blur." Sarah and Mark exchanged a quick glance. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, the plan to use my memory loss to their advantage taking shape. "It's okay, Dad," Sarah said softly, guiding me to a chair. "The important thing is you're home and safe. Are you hungry? I can heat up some dinner." "A little," I said, trying to look weak and frail. "And I need to take my medicine. I think I missed a few doses." "Of course," Sarah nodded with professional concern. "I'll get it for you right away. We need to get you back on your schedule. It's very important for your heart." She went to the kitchen, and Mark sat across from me, studying my face. "You gave us a real scare, old man," he said with false friendliness. Sarah was beside herself. "Yes, I saw the news," I replied cautiously. "I'm sorry for all the trouble." He leaned forward. "You really don't remember why you left?" His voice held a hint of suspicion. I looked down, as if trying to recall. "Vaguely. I felt like I was in danger. Like I had to run. It must have been a bad dream, and I wasn't fully awake." Mark leaned back, visibly relaxing. "It happens," he nodded, "especially at your age." "Well, thank God you're all right. Where were you all this time?" I recounted the story we had prepared, about the kind woman who had taken me in, about my memories slowly returning, and about my decision to come home after seeing the news. Sarah returned with a tray. On it was a bowl of soup and my pills, neatly arranged in their plastic container. "Here, Dad," she said, placing the tray on the table beside me. "Eat this and take your medicine. You need to get your strength back." I looked at the pills with a shudder. What if she had already started? What if she had decided to act now? "Thank you," I mumbled, picking up the spoon. "You're very thoughtful." Sarah smiled, her professional nurse's smile. "I called Dr. Evans," she said. "He wants to see you tomorrow, just to make sure everything is okay." I nodded, slowly eating my soup. I hadn't touched the pills yet. I needed a plan. "I think I'll take them after I eat," I said, "so they don't upset my stomach." Sarah nodded, not suspecting a thing. "Of course, Dad. Just don't forget." After dinner, I said I was tired and wanted to rest. Sarah walked me to my room, fluffed my pillow and drew the curtains. "Get some rest, Dad," she said, kissing my forehead. "I'm so glad you're home." When she left, I quietly turned off the recorder. The first recording was done. Nothing incriminating yet, but it was a start. The important thing was that they seemed to believe my story. I flushed the pills down the toilet. It wasn't worth the risk. I had my own supply, the ones George had given me, hidden in my bag. I took those instead. The next 2 days were tense. I played the part of a frail, confused old man. Sarah watched me take my medication every day, but I became skilled at palming the pills and getting rid of them later. The visit to Dr. Evans was uneventful. He found my condition to be stable and prescribed a mild sedative. Sarah listened intently to all his recommendations, the perfect, caring daughter. On the third day, I got my chance. I was napping in my room when I heard Mark come home early. He and Sarah were talking in the kitchen, thinking I was asleep. I quietly switched on the recorder and cracked my door open just enough to hear. "Did you get it?" Sarah asked in a low voice. "Yeah," Mark answered. "Your friend at the pharmacy didn't ask any questions. I told him it was for a hospice patient." I tensed, listening with every fiber of my being. They were talking about the drug. "When do we start?" Mark asked. "Time is running out. The bills are piling up." "We have to wait a little longer," Sarah said, her voice laced with worry. "It's too risky so soon after he came back. People will be watching." "How long? A week? 2? The bank won't wait forever, Sarah." "I know." There was an edge of irritation in her voice. "You think I like this? He's my father, damn it." "The father who was never there for you," Mark reminded her. "The father who has done nothing but criticize you your whole life." "It doesn't matter," Sarah replied quietly. "This is still murder." "It's not murder. It's a mercy," Mark countered. "He's an old, sick man. We're just speeding up the inevitable and solving our problems at the same time." There was a long silence. I could picture Sarah wrestling with what was left of her conscience, and Mark staring at her, waiting. "All right," she said finally. "In a week. We'll start with a small dose in his evening pills. We'll increase it gradually. It will look like his condition is naturally getting worse." "What if he runs away again?" Mark sounded worried. "What if he suspects something?" "He won't," Sarah said confidently. "You've seen him. He's weak and confused. He probably doesn't even remember our conversation, if he ever really heard it. Maybe it was just a bad dream, like he said." I clenched my fists, fighting back a wave of rage. They talked about me like I was an object, a problem to be disposed of, and my own daughter was prepared to slowly poison me, to watch me fade away day by day. "Let me see it," Sarah said. I heard the rustle of a small package. "Yes, this is it. Perfect. I'll hide it in our room, in the back of the medicine cabinet. He never looks in there." "Make sure the kids don't find it," Mark warned. "Mia is always snooping through your things." "I'll keep it safe," Sarah promised. Their voices faded as they moved toward their bedroom. I quietly closed my door and turned off the recorder. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't just from fear. It was from triumph. I had it. I had the tape. I had the proof. That evening, I swapped the pills in my official container with the safe ones George had given me. Now, when Sarah started adding her poison, I would still be taking my real medication. The next morning, Sarah brought my breakfast and pills as usual. I noticed she watched me carefully, making sure I swallowed every one. "Is everything okay, Dad?" she asked with her practiced concern. "You look a little pale." "My chest hurts a bit," I replied, which was true. The stress was taking a toll. "Well, if it gets worse, you let me know," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. I nodded, looking into her eyes. What was she feeling? Guilt? Or just impatience? A few days later, I started to feel genuinely worse. Even though I wasn't taking the poison, the constant stress and fear were wearing me down. That evening, I was sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV, secretly recording another conversation between Sarah and Mark. They were discussing how well I was responding to the new medication. Suddenly, a sharp, crushing pain exploded in my chest, radiating down my left arm and into my jaw. I gasped, the remote falling from my hand. My vision blurred. "Dad!" Sarah ran out of the kitchen. Dad! She rushed to my side, her fingers immediately going to my wrist to check my pulse. I saw panic in her eyes. Not for me, but for her plan. If I died now, too quickly, an autopsy might reveal the truth. "Mark!" she yelled. "Call 911. Dad's having a heart attack." Mark appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of confusion. "Are you sure? Maybe it's just—" "Call 911!" she screamed, unbuttoning my shirt. While Mark fumbled with the phone, Sarah laid me down on the sofa. "Hang on, Dad," she said, pulling a nitroglycerin tablet from her pocket. "Put this under your tongue. The ambulance is on its way." I looked into her eyes, trying to understand. Was she saving me out of fear of being caught, or was there a flicker of daughterly love left in her? At that moment, it didn't matter. She was doing what she was trained to do. The nitroglycerin began to work, the pain receding slightly. But I knew this attack was more serious than the others. My heart was struggling. "Breathe slowly, Dad," Sarah said, holding my hand. "The ambulance will be here in a few minutes." I tried to focus, fighting the rising panic. I couldn't die now, not when I was so close. Not when I had the proof. Through a haze of pain, I saw Mark pacing nervously. "It wasn't because of the—" he started to ask, but Sarah cut him off with a sharp, "Not now." The sound of an approaching siren filled the air. A minute later, paramedics were in the room with a stretcher. Sarah immediately switched into professional mode, rattling off my condition, symptoms, and medical history. "EKG confirms a major cardiac event," one of the paramedics said. "We need to transport immediately." They quickly moved me onto the stretcher. I saw Sarah's worried face, Mark's tense one. The same question was in their eyes. Will he survive? And if he does, what happens next? "I'm coming with you," Sarah told the paramedics. "I'm a paramedic. I know his history." They nodded, letting her into the ambulance. The last thing I saw before the doors closed was Mark's face, lost and scared. This was not part of their plan. In the ambulance, Sarah held my hand. "It's going to be okay, Dad," she repeated over and over. "We're almost at the hospital." I looked at her through the fog of pain and wondered, does she know I have the tapes? Does she know I remember everything? The ambulance sped through the night, carrying me away from one danger and into another. But I was still alive, and as long as I was alive, I had a chance. The sterile white hospital room became my sanctuary for the next 2 weeks. The heart attack had been serious, but not fatal. The doctors called it a major warning and ordered complete rest. Sarah was a model of filial devotion. She spent hours by my bedside, bringing me fruit and magazines and overseeing my medications. The nurses all commented on what a wonderful, caring daughter I had, completely unaware of the darkness hiding behind her perfect facade. "You just need to rest, Dad," she'd say with professional concern. "Dr. Ramirez says it will take time for you to recover." I would nod, playing the part of the grateful patient. But whenever she was near, a knot of fear would tighten in my stomach. What if she decided to finish the job here? It would be even easier in a hospital where, as a paramedic, she had access to countless drugs. Mark visited less often, blaming his busy schedule. But I could see the impatience in his eyes. My survival was an inconvenience they hadn't planned for. My true salvation was George. He showed up on the 3rd day with a fruit basket and a book of crossword puzzles. "An old friend," I told Sarah when she found him in my room. "We were neighbors for years." Sarah gave George a polite but suspicious smile. "It's nice to meet you. Dad never mentioned you." "Old folks forget things," George said with a good-natured grin. "How are you holding up, Arthur? You look terrible, but at least you're breathing." His casual tone broke the tension. Sarah left soon after, and George and I were finally alone. "Did you get it?" he asked in a low voice, leaning closer. I nodded, gesturing toward my clothes on the chair. In the vest pocket, 3 tapes. They were planning to poison me slowly. Mark already got the drug. George let out a low whistle. Those monsters. What's the plan now? Take the tapes, I whispered. Keep them somewhere safe. I'll talk to a lawyer as soon as I get out of here. But if something happens to me before then... Nothing is going to happen to you, George said firmly. I'll be here every day. They won't be able to slip anything into your food or medicine with me around. He was true to his word. George visited at different times each day, often surprising Sarah. The strained politeness between them was thick with unspoken animosity. During my 2nd week in the hospital, George brought a well-dressed, middle-aged man with him. This is David Chen, he introduced him. He's my lawyer. I was getting my own affairs in order and thought you might want some advice. I understood immediately. Sarah wasn't there, so we could speak freely. Mr. Hampton, Chen said seriously after George had closed the door. I'm aware of your situation. George has told me everything and let me listen to the tapes. If what's on them is true, you have a very strong case. It's true, I said firmly. My daughter and her husband planned to murder me from my house. Chen nodded, taking notes. We need to be careful. If your daughter suspects you know something, she might try to destroy the evidence or act rashly. What do you suggest? I asked. First, I've already made copies of the recordings and given one to a trusted detective. The police have started a quiet, preliminary investigation. Second, we need to protect your assets. I suggest you draw up a new will, one that explicitly disinherits your daughter and states that in the event of your death, under any suspicious circumstances, a full investigation is to be launched. Sarah will find out, I objected. She goes through all my mail. She won't, Chen said. The will stays with me. No paperwork will be sent to your house. It was a solid plan. That day, I signed a new will, leaving my estate to a local charity for the elderly. Chen also helped me prepare a power of attorney, giving George the authority to act on my behalf if I became incapacitated. Now we need to catch them in the act, Chen said before he left. The recordings are powerful, but a good defense attorney could argue they were taken out of context. We need to catch them red-handed. How? I asked, my heart sinking at the thought of returning to that house. Detective Reynolds has a plan, Chen replied. He'll be in touch after you're discharged. But be prepared, Mr. Hampton. You're going to have to be the bait. 2 weeks later, I was discharged. Sarah was the picture of a loving daughter, helping me pack and listening carefully to the doctor's instructions. You need complete rest, Dad, she said as she helped me into the car. No stress. I know, I replied meekly. Thank you for taking care of me, Sarah. At the house, a warm welcome awaited. Mark had even taken the day off. Paige and Derek had made a get-well-soon card, no doubt at their mother's insistence. We're so glad you're home, Dad, Sarah said, settling me into my room. Everything is going to be fine now. I smiled and thanked them, but inside I was wound as tight as a spring. That evening I called George on the secret phone he had slipped me at the hospital. I'm back, I whispered. What's next? Detective Reynolds wants to meet tomorrow, George said. I'll come by to check on you and we'll go see him. The next day, George arrived with another fruit basket and suggested we go for a short drive. Sarah protested, but I insisted. Detective Reynolds was a sturdy, no-nonsense man with sharp eyes. We met in a quiet diner on the edge of town. Mr. Hampton, he said, I've listened to your tapes. If they're authentic, your daughter and son-in-law have committed a very serious crime. They're authentic, I said. Every word. Reynolds nodded. Our preliminary investigation confirms a few things. Your daughter did acquire a drug from her work that is outside her normal duties, and their financial situation is dire. They're on the verge of foreclosure. I clenched my fists. It was one thing to suspect, another to have it confirmed by the police. What now? We need to catch them in the act, Reynolds said. The recordings are a good start, but for a conviction, we need more. We're proposing a sting operation. He laid out the plan. I would return to the house and continue playing the part of the frail, oblivious old man. Meanwhile, the police would install hidden cameras and microphones in my room. When Sarah or Mark tried to give me the poisoned medication, they would be arrested on the spot. That's dangerous, George interjected. What if they act sooner than you expect? Mr. Hampton will have a panic button, Reynolds replied, showing me a small device that looked like a car key fob. One press, and a team will be inside in under 2 minutes. Plus, we'll be monitoring the live feed around the clock. It was a terrifying plan, but it was my only option. We agreed the police would install the equipment the next day while Sarah was at work and Mark was out. On the 4th day after the cameras were installed, things came to a head. Mark took the kids to his mother's for the weekend. Sarah took the day off, saying she wanted to spend some time with me. "How are you feeling, Dad?" she asked, sitting on the edge of my bed with a cup of tea. "A little better," I answered, watching her hands. "Still weak, though?" She nodded. "That's normal. I brought your morning pills." She handed me a glass of water and a small pile of pills. I noticed a new one among them, small, white, and unmarked. "What's this?" I asked, pointing to it. Sarah's smile didn't waver, but I saw a flicker of tension in her eyes. "Oh, that's a new one. Dr. Ramirez prescribed an extra heart medication. I forgot to tell you." It was a lie. Dr. Ramirez hadn't prescribed anything new. I knew that because Detective Reynolds had checked all my medical records. "That's strange," I said, pretending to be confused. "He didn't mention it to me." "He called me yesterday," Sarah said quickly. "It's standard for patients after a serious heart attack." I nodded as if I believed her. Under the covers, I discreetly pressed the panic button. The team would be here in 2 minutes. I just had to stall. "You know," I said, looking at the pills in my palm, "I've been thinking about our old house, the one where your mom and I lived." Sarah tensed. "What about it?" "I think we should sell it," I said, watching her reaction. "It's just sitting empty. And the money? Well, it could help you and Mark. I know you've been having a tough time financially." Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. "What makes you think we're having a tough time?" "I'm not blind, Sarah," I said softly. "I see how you and Mark whisper about bills, how you jump when the mail comes. You're living beyond your means. Take your medicine, Dad," she said, changing the subject. "It will make you feel better." I stared at the pills in my hand. One of them was poison, given to me by my own daughter. "Do you know what the saddest part of all this is, Sarah?" I asked quietly. "It's not that you want me dead. It's that you couldn't even wait for nature to take its course." Her face went white. "What are you talking about, Dad? I don't understand." "I heard you," I continued, the weight of the last few weeks finally lifting. "That night, before I ran away, I heard you and Mark discussing how to get rid of me, how you were going to put something in my medicine to give me a heart attack." She froze, a look of pure horror on her face. You remember?" she whispered. "But the doctors, the dementia." "I never had dementia, Sarah," I said firmly. "That was your story, a clever one, I'll admit, so that no one would believe me." At that exact moment, the front door crashed open. Police officers in tactical gear stormed into the room. "Police! Don't move!" An officer yelled, pointing his weapon at Sarah. She stood frozen, the glass of water still in her hand, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Dad, what did you do?" "I did what I had to do," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "I protected myself." The next few weeks were a blur. The arrest of Mark, who was caught trying to flee. The preliminary hearing, where the tapes of their conversations were played. The lab analysis confirming the white pill contained a lethal dose of potassium chloride. The trial was swift. The evidence was undeniable. Sarah and Mark were each sentenced to 20 years in prison. Their children went to live with Mark's sister. After it was all over, I moved back into my old house. With George's help, I started fixing it up, bringing it back to life. The physical work was good for me. It kept my mind off the betrayal, off the trial, off my shattered family. Letters from Sarah started arriving from prison, full of apologies, regrets, and pleas for forgiveness. I never opened them. I just wrote return to sender on the envelopes and sent them back. She tried to reach me through her lawyer, through social workers, even through George. But my mind was made up. There would be no more contact. She had stopped being my daughter the moment she decided my life was worth less than a house. 1 year after the trial, I was sitting on my front porch watching the sunset. The air was warm and smelled of freshly cut grass and the roses Helen had planted along the walkway years ago. The bitterness was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it no longer consumed me. I had learned to live with it, like a chronic illness. I knew I would never forgive them, but I also knew I wouldn't let their betrayal define the rest of my days. I was free from their control, their lies, their presence. I was living in my own home, by my own rules. And in that freedom, there was a quiet, bittersweet joy. The joy of a man who had looked death in the face and had found the strength to fight back.